Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. As we now are waiting for the other screen to start up. Okay. I'm the only one here right now, so I guess I'll have to wait a few moments, see if anybody else shows up here. Hopefully, hopefully we'll get some people in here pretty soon here. It's a man called Sting. It's a man called Sting. You like this, you like that. Quick as a bull and you're quick as a cat. No, I'm gonna try. Every time you look in the eye, don't you know it's something that happens this way? And you know what you're gonna have to say. Sting. It's a man called Sting. It's a man called Sting. It's a man called Sting. Don't you know what you know you're gonna have to say to the man called Sting? It's a man called Sting. It's a man called Sting. Don't you know I get out of your way? You know you're gonna have to say to the man called Sting. To the man called Sting. Man called Sting. It's a man called Sting. Ah. Don't you know it's better? Get out of your way. You know you're gonna have to say to the man called Sting. 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 It's a man called Sting. It's a man called Sting. You're gonna have to say to the man called Sting. To the man called Sting. It's a man called Sting. It's a man called Sting. Don't you know it's fire? Get out of the way. You know you're gonna have to say to the man called Sting. It's a man called Sting. It's a man called Sting. It's a man called Sting. Hey, hey, J-Man. Not much. I'm glad somebody finally came. uh, okay, well, at least now with one other person in here. Excuse me just one moment. Oh, sorry about that. I had to do something off camera there. Anyways, thanks for dropping in there, J-Man. So now that I got one other person, I guess I'll start guess I'll start the presentation now. So as I told you earlier, when I came into your, and I actually did come back when I went and grabbed my dinner. By the way, I went back there to check see if you were still there. So just here to let you know that. But anyways, um, so yeah, so as the title says, settle the score and say no more in a special way to another, you know, to another day. That's basically what I'm going to talk about here. Of course, is kind of go over the history of some specialty matches here. Kind of give a bit of a background too, because and I sure like J-Man, you as being a current wrestling fan, they do specialty matches almost all the time. It's like they're not really even special anymore because they're done like all the time. But there was a time when specialty matches were special. They weren't done like all the time. They were done in many ways to settle feuds to or special attractions. They weren't meant to be, done like all the time, you know. So I'm gonna go through and talk a little bit about some, as I said, some historical specialty matches. So here we go. The first one I'm gonna talk about, of course, is the Battle Royal. Okay, the now traditionally the Battle Royal is a multi-competitor type match, which you could have anywhere from 4 to 60 people in the ring all at once. Okay. Now, traditionally, how it starts out is everybody starts out in the ring, and then the objective of course of the match is to be the last one in the ring. But how you eliminate people, how it is traditionally done most of the time, is you throw people out over the top rope. Now with in the case of in women's matches, usually they're at times allowed to throw through the second or even underneath the bottom rope to eliminate them. But basically, you get thrown out over the top rope, and and um, and when both feet touch the floor, you're eliminated. Now, in sometimes instead of throwing an opponent out over the top rope, sometimes you can allow, in some battle royals they've allowed for pinfalls or submissions for eliminations. And then there have been some variations you've when if you get down to the last two in the battle royal, there are some that have had stipulations. I think the St. Louis Wrestling Club back, NWA territory of St. Louis back in the 70s, 80s did this more usually with 4-man battle royals, is that if you got down to the last two, it would turn into a straight up singles match, and the winner of that singles match won the battle royal. And then, of course, we've seen different variations over the years. The Royal Rumble, most notably, where you start out with two, but more or less the battle royal was traditionally how it, have a whole bunch start out, throw people over the top rope. Um, Now, historically, a lot of times battle royals were used as special attraction matches. Sometimes you'd have a belt on the line, or sometimes like a number one contendership would be on the line, but a lot of times it was usually to make it more of a special attraction. They might put they might put money on the line. They might put a certain amount of money. Sometimes it could be called a $2,000, they might put up $1,000, 2,000, 3,000, whatever, a certain amount of money. The winner of the battle royal, of course, would win the money. Now, the king of the battle royals back in the day was, of course, Andre the Giant, the late great Andre the Giant. It took a lot of to get that what was billed He was billed, of course, at 7'4". Towards the end of his career, he was over the 500-pound mark. Hey, Brian. Well, thanks for coming in. Um, now it looks like I have 3 people in. We reference the old. Okay, interesting. So, current WWE video games actually reference the old days when they used to do pinfalls and submissions on opponents. Yes, some battle royals in the olden days would actually use J-Man. That's right. Sometimes instead of throwing the man over the top rope, sometimes they would use pinfall or submissions in a battle royal. And just as a reminder, guys, if you guys can help with the algorithm by liking and sharing, that'd be great. That would be a great help. If we can at least get this shared a bit, maybe we can get some more people in here as well. To learn more about some of these specialty matches. Brian, you made it. You made it because I just started. I'm talking right now about the battle royal. But I would appreciate it if you guys could like and share if you guys can. That'd be appreciated. Um, just so we can see if we can get some more people in here. Um, so yeah, yeah. Now, interesting enough, now back when the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA, was the main, when the NWA was what the WWE is today, you know, they ran things a little differently. They were run by a board, and then they had a bunch of territories, what they call territories throughout the country and even across the globe. Um, Now, a lot of the West Coast NWA territories, Pacific Northwest, up in the Pacific Northwest. Let's see, Big Time Wrestling in San Francisco and NWA Hollywood. Every year around New Year's Day, they would actually have an annual battle royal, and it was usually for a cash prize. It was a special attraction match. That was kind of a way to start off the year. And excuse me just one more moment. All right, I'm back. Excuse me. Mm, screw it. Anyways, yeah, so that's pretty much the history of battle royals. I wish I had a little bit more detail on when exactly they started, but that's more or less the gist of the battle royals. Generally speaking, they start out with a whole bunch of guys in the ring, and it looks like we have a fourth person in here. Hello. It looks like we have a fourth person in here. I just saw the. Let's see. Hello, whoever just came in. I hope you're enjoying the video so far. Yeah, J-Man, Brian, myself, and one other person. So anyways, I'll be listening, and I'm going to be playing 7 days a day. Okay. Well, as long as you listen in, as long as you listen in and hear the content, I'm happy. So, anyways, so the next match I'm going to talk about, since I can find it here, is the Iron Man match. Is what I'll be talking about next. Here we go. So, okay, so the general rules of an Iron Man match are basically you're given a certain amount of time for the match. We've heard of a few, like 60-minute, usually 30-minute or 60-minute time limit, and the idea of the match is to see who can score the most victories, whether they be pinfall, submission, count out, or disqualification in that time. Um, there have been some classic Iron Man matches. Actually, as I was doing the research earlier, of course, I think most people know about the Iron Man match between um, between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, and went to overtime at WrestleMania 12 back on March 31st, 1996. But believe it or not, that wasn't necessarily the first Iron Man match. Wasn't even the first one in the WWE. Actually, in terms of the WWE, of course, at the time known as WWF, there was Bret Hart had beat Ric Flair at a house show in Boston Garden, 3 falls to 2 for retaining the WWF World Heavyweight Championship. According to what I found, the actual first Iron Man match was a 30-minute Iron Man match in WCW back on June the 20th, 1992, from Mobile, Alabama, 2 years before you were born, Brian, at Beach Blast 1992. The match was between Ricky Steamboat and Rick Rude. Ricky Steamboat had been involved in a rivalry with Rick Flew, trying to wrest the at the time the WCW United States Heavyweight Championship from Rick Rude. But this is not for the title. I don't think at this point Rude may have dropped the U.S. title at this time, but at Beach Blast 1992 was the first Iron Man match, according to the records I have here. But you will often find you will you will often find, however, that it's usually the more athletically gifted, because an Iron Man match obviously takes a lot of stamina, because you're talking about Ric Flair. One of the nicknames he had earned over the years was as the 60-minute man, of course, for maybe not necessarily for some of the reasons you might think, but I digress. um, let's see. It's kind of funny because the one Iron Man match Ric Flair was involved with in the WWF, he lost, and it doesn't look like he was involved. So it's kind of funny because he was known for his cardiovascular conditioning. Yet the one Iron Man match he actually had, um, he lost. But among some of the more well known Iron Man matches, of course the one I alluded to earlier, the one from WrestleMania 12, Anaheim, California. When overtime in which Shawn Michaels beat Bret Hart for the WWF World Heavyweight Championship, 1-0. Triple H beating The Rock at Judgment Day 2000 on May 21st. Six falls to 5 of the WWF Championship. Chris Benoit had defeated Kurt Angle in overtime 4-3 in an ultimate submission match, which is a variation on the Iron Man match in which it was basically back and forth submissions. So that happened at Backlash 2001. So, and basically Chris Benoit won both of his ultimate submission matches. Brock Lesnar beat Kurt Angle in an Iron Man match for the WWE Championship on SmackDown September 18, 2003 in Raleigh, North Carolina. So, yeah, there have been a few over the years that here's another one. That was a more of a punk one, but in WCW, of course, I mentioned the Ricky Steamboat Rick Rude match, and then a year later at Beach Blast 1993 from Biloxi, Mississippi, on July the 18th, 1993, Rick Rude was involved in another Iron Man match, this time with Dustin Rhodes, where they wrestled to a draw for the vacant WCW United States Championship. This is probably one of the only times I could see on here in which the promotion didn't push for an overtime here to try to. This was a championship match, so you would think that they would have probably wanted to. They would have probably wanted to. They would have probably wanted to try to to push for a sudden death match. Most promotions have, WWF did, and then in Total Nonstop Action, of course, AJ Styles in their first Iron Man match they ever had at Against All Odds on February 13th, 2005, AJ Styles retained the TNA X Division Championship over Christopher Daniels, 2-1 in overtime. And then they went again at Bound for Glory later that year, with the exception that it's not going overtime. So yeah, so basically you'd have a lot of them. Kurt Angle did much better. He won his only Iron Man match for in his time with TNA. AJ Styles went 2-3 in his matches, and then so yeah. So basically, those are some of the highlights of the Iron Man match and some of the history behind that. So moving on then. So the next match I'm going to talk about is the ladder match. Now, this one, because of some of the notes I read on this, I found this interesting. I kind of knew about some of it, but didn't realize another fact in this too. Now, I know a lot of people believe it was WrestleMania 10, but okay, here we go. Here's the ladder match entry. Okay, so first I have to understand, just to remind everybody what a ladder match is. A ladder match is a match in which some kind of prize, whether usually it's either a belt, a championship, or the contract for a possible contendership to a championship is suspended above the ring. And the idea of a ladder match is to wear your opponent down enough to where you can set up the ladder, climb the ladder, and grab whatever the prize is. Most of the time, it's usually a belt or a contract for a shot at a belt. Sometimes, though, it can be money. Sometimes it can be a weapon. But basically, it's the idea of something being suspended above the ring and you having to utilize a ladder to go grab it. And the ladder, of course, is in play. We see ladder matches a lot more now. As the rules have always stated, the ladder is in place. So you can use it as a weapon. You can use it as a launching pad for attacks. See this a lot with with the Hardys. They use it a lot but we also saw this a lot in ECW too. Okay. Now, I understand a lot of people probably believe that the ladder match to determine the undisputed Intercontinental Championship at WrestleMania 10 on March 20th, 1994, between Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels was the first ever ladder match. I am here to tell you that is not the case. Not only was that not the first ladder match in the history of pro wrestling, that wasn't even the first ladder match in the WWF. Okay. I'll read you here the origins of the ladder match. The ladder match was believed to be invented by, I think according to this dating, there was a wrestler by the name of Dan Kroffat. Now, this is not the same Dan Kroffat who teamed with Doug Furnas in the late 80s, early 90s. That was Phil LaFon, who took on the name himself. There was a wrestler back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s who wrestled primarily up in Canada for Stampede Wrestling, named Dan Kroffat. In September 1972, Stampede Wrestling held the first ever ladder match between Dan Kroffat and Tor Kamada, where the object to be grabbed was a wad of money. I told you that sometimes it was money that they would go after. Most of the time, it was usually a championship or the contract for a championship. Also, in 1987, Kendo Nagasaki. This Kendo Nagasaki was a British wrestler who went under the mask of Kendo. There have been a few guys who've gone with the persona Kendo Nagasaki, but this was a British wrestler. I believe his name was Peter Thornsley. So in 1987, Kendo Nagasaki competed in a Disco Challenge ladder match against Clive Myers on the popular World of Sport. World of Sport was a British sport. It was, I guess, the best way to describe World of Sport. World of Sport was Britain's version of Wide World of Sports here in the States. But they actually did have professional wrestling on their show. So the aim of this match was to retrieve a gold-colored record suspended above the ring. And then in July 1983, Stampede Wrestling held a ladder match in which Bret Hart faced off against Bad News Allen. Some fans might remember Bad News Allen as Bad News Brown in the WWF. Hart went on to join the World Wrestling Federation in 1984. Before I get to that, though, there's one more ladder match I, of course, want to talk about here. And that ladder match, of course, happened, I believe it was in 1978, 1979. And it happened between Jake Roberts and Sylvester Ritter. Most of you would know Sylvester Ritter better as the Junkyard Dog. Actually, in fact, he didn't go by the name Sylvester. He went by the name Big Daddy Ritter at the time. His real name was Sylvester Ritter, but he went by the name. So, and I think it was 78 or 79 in Stampede Wrestling, again, Stampede. Um, Jake Roberts and Big Daddy Ritter faced off in a ladder match. I don't remember who won that one, but I do remember a ladder match happening at that time. So, I know a lot of people probably believe that Shawn might, but here's a little bit more information, background information too. So, when after Bret Hart in 1984 went to the World Wrestling Federation in the early 90s, he actually suggested the match to Vince McMahon. Of course, years, as I said here, years before the match became popular. Now, as I told you earlier, not only was the ladder match between Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon not only the first one, not only was it not the first one, period, it wasn't even the first one in the WWF. Okay. At a TV taping for WWF Wrestling Challenge on July 21st, 1992 in Portland, Maine, Bret Hart would actually face Shawn Michaels for the Intercontinental Championship, which he was defending the championship. Was not televised at that time. It was included on the 2007 The Ladder Match DVD. And among the bonus material that was done for the 2011 DVD and Blu-ray collection, WWE's Greatest Rivalry, Shawn Michaels versus Hart, the two performers tell interviewer Jim Ross how the match was planned along with an intended ladder rematch that never materialized. So the actual first ladder match in the WWF actually happened on July 21st at a Wrestling Challenge TV taping. That for the WWF, and then but the first ever ladder match actually happened all the way back in 1972. And I'm going through here now, just trying to get some other numbers here, some other. Let's see. Let's see. Actually, one of the first ladder matches that happened for WCW, in fact, was a barbed wire ladder match for $100,000. Again, another one where a championship wasn't on the line, but money was involved this time. From the Great American Bash back in 1987, from Charlotte, North Carolina, on July 18th, 1987, in which Dusty Rhodes defeated Tully Blanchard in the match for that $100,000. One of the first ladder matches to happen on Impact, what is now known as Impact Wrestling, was back then known as NWA Total Nonstop Action. Happened on July 3rd, early on in 2002, as a match for the number one contendership for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, Sabu defeating Malice. So, yeah. So the ladder match, needless to say, is not just let's jump off a ladder a bunch of times onto each other like a clown show. There was a reason. You usually had to go grab something, whether it be a title or the contract to a title or money. Always something on the line. It wasn't just an acrobatics show. Albeit for entertainment purposes, it was a pretty good acrobatic show. But that's what a ladder match was not meant to be. It was not meant to be an acrobatic show. Specialty matches as a whole were meant to mean something. Whether it was to settle a feud, whether it was to grant a title, get money, they meant something. So let's see. So now I'm going to go on and talk about the last man standing match. Now, there's of course last man standing, and there's also another a subset of last man standing known as the death match. I'll talk about both of those here. As in case y'all wondering if you can hear that barking in the background, it's our dog. Whatever reason, she's deciding to let everybody know that she's there for some reason. Anyways, I'm looking for the last man standing. I'll probably pass it. Oh, there we go. Now, first off, the basic last man standing is as it says. It's a last man standing match. A last man standing match or last woman standing match, um, depending upon if if women is a hardcore style match in which wrestler will lose the match if they are unable to answer a 10 count after being down, similar to knockdown rules or knockout rules in a. To avoid losing, the downed wrestler must be on their feet. Oh wait, no. To avoid losing, the downed wrestler must be on their feet by the count of 10, but they cannot lose by leaving the ring for a 10 count ring, what they call a ring out, if they are still on their feet while recovering. In other words, if you're standing up, you're still in the match. Okay. Last man standing, of course, is more of a modern version of it, but more of a traditional one that was used in the past was the death match, often referred to as a Texas death match or a Mexican death match, or well, I think a more modern variation of it is the Armageddon Rules match, in which a wrestler must be pinned or made to submit, rendered unconscious before the referee will begin the 10 count. Some of these matches have been known to last for hours, including one that Dory Funk participated in that went on for more than 4 hours. And I also remember hearing about one that happened in Memphis between Jerry Lawler and Dutch Mantell, where they basically went 28 falls and ended in I think a time curfew draw or something like that. So the death match was used more in older times, in which what you would do is you'd wrestle, you'd get a pinfall or submission on your opponent, or or you might render them unconscious by knocking them out, or like applying something like a sleeper or a cobra clutch or whatever. Um, but once you knock them out, once you score the pinfall or submission, then then um, then after you scored the pinfall and submission, then the ref started the count. If the wrestler could not return to their feet before the 10 count ended, then they lost the match. In a death match, you don't just lose via pinfall or submission or knockout. Well, technically knockout if you can't answer the count of 10. You have to be off your feet like the traditional last man standing match. You have to be off your feet for a count of 10. So, as I said, I mentioned a couple of like one that I remember from the territory days of Memphis, where I talked about Jerry Lawler and Dutch Mantell. For those of you who don't know the name Dutch Mantell, more recently he was known as Zeb Coulter in the WWF. So, just in case you were wondering. So, okay, so now after last man standing, that's about as much as I can say on that, obviously. Now I'm going to move on to another match called Loser Leaves Town match. Now, These ones, because of how nationalized most wrestling, you have the national wrestling promotions like WWF and Impact and AEW and all that. You have the independents. Okay. The loser leaves town match is an interesting. It's more from the territory days, in which, as I can find it here. Let's see. I know it's here somewhere. I get it. Find it. Loser leaves town. Oh, here we go. So, the loser leaves town match is a generic term for any match in which the loser has to leave the current promotion or subdivision. These matches were most often held during the territorial days when wrestlers frequently jumped from company to company. Was held with greater. They said it was held with greater frequency in the WWE with the brand split. Basically, the idea of the loser leaves town. Now, this was a staple more of the territorial days, as I explained earlier. The NWA ran as a committee. They would have their four main world championships: the world heavyweight, world junior heavyweight, world women's, and world women's tag. They'd have those titles and they'd have them tour around the country, going from territory to territory. They wouldn't stay in one, but you had a number of the NWA ran like as a board. Um, hey, John, how you doing? Welcome to the stream. I'm glad you made it. Um, I've been talking about specialty matches here. I'm right now getting into talking about the loser leaves town match. I'm sorry you missed the first couple matches in which I talked about the battle royal and the battle royal, Iron Man and ladder match. But hopefully, now that you're here, you'll, you know, and if you can help me out too, John, if you can like and share so we can see if we can get some more people in here, that'd be appreciated if you can. Um, hopefully, though, we can get some more people here. So yeah, so as you were just coming in now, as I was saying, I'm now getting ready to talk about the loser leaves town matches. I've talked about the battle royal, Iron Man, ladder match, and last man standing match. And I was also talking in the last man standing match about the death match as well, the traditions of the death match. So I was saying earlier, of course, a lot of these specialty matches were used to settle feuds or to gain championships or gain cash or contracts for championships. So yeah, the loser leaves town matches were used more back in the territorial days. Now, it just because you lost it doesn't necessarily mean that you left the territory for good. Okay, a loser leaves town match, as I once heard Lance Russell describe it, usually in most cases during the territorial days, the person who lost a loser leaves town match was usually like banned from that territory for 90 days. Okay, this would allow wrestlers to go to other promotions to hone their craft, to hone their character, especially if they were being looked at as a possible world title contender. Because as I explained earlier, back in the territorial days of the NWA, the world title holders, usually the ones that were recognized by the main NWA committee, which was NWA World Heavyweight, World Junior Heavyweight, World Women's, and World Women's Tag Team Championship. They toured around the country to different territories and would defend the title. So if you were being looked at as as a possible world title contender, you couldn't just stay in your home territory and yeah, you could dominate there, but you needed to show that you could also dominate in other territories. You know, even though Jerry Lawler, for example, Jerry Lawler became synonymous with with the Memphis area. He was, eventually where he, along with Jerry Jarrett, led a coup to separate from Nick Gulas's NWA Mid America territory in 1977. And they eventually became an affiliate. But Jerry Lawler would also at times would leave the Memphis area to go to like Georgia or to come out west to wrestle in other parts of the country to gain more of a reputation to build up his credit as a main eventer world title contender. So a lot of times, the loser leaves town stipulation would allow guys to move on to other territories to where they could hone their craft. They could always come back like after 90 days, but usually it was used one to give guys a chance to move on to other territories to hone their craft. Also, it was as with many matches in the as with many matches during the time period, many of those type of matches, it was used to settle feuds. They were used a lot of times to settle feuds. I know I've gone through a lot of information this far, and I know like John, you just came in late. Do you guys have any questions about anything I've talked about so far? Is there anything you guys would like to ask me about what I've talked about thus far? Maybe some clarification on some stuff, or maybe if you missed something, I could maybe briefly go over if there's a particular, like as I said, I've already gone through Battle Royal, Iron Man match, ladder match, and Last Man Standing. So prior to the loser leaves town, is there any matches that you guys? Is there any of those matches that you guys maybe want to ask me about, or anything you want clarified? I'm just going silent because I'm just waiting to see if there's anything you guys wanting to ask. Okay, since I'm not seeing any of yet, guess I'll move on to the next match I'm going to talk about here. And the next match I'm going to talk about in Spanish, it's called the Luchas de Apuestas match. Now, among the translations here for these matches include bet match, gambling fights, and matches with wagers. These were matches that are more done in Mexico. Um, but we've had a few here in the States too. So I'll go over here and read from the thing here. Luchas de apuestas are matches in which both wrestlers wager something specific, the mask or hair. Now, to understand that aspect of it, in Mexico, the mask and the mask and hair are symbols of pride for wrestlers. Okay, the mask in particular, because the mask for a luchador is a matter of pride. It's their identity. It's like if you take your opponent's mask in a luchas de apuestas, you basically have taken their identity. You've taken who they are. That's tradition in Mexico. Give me a sec here while I turn on the light here a little bit. More Like, the sun is coming down here. We've been on for a while here now. So, with that, so I'll continue on here. Um, on the outcome. The loser of the match then loses the item, being forced to take off their mask or be shaved bald. It is also possible for a wrestler to put someone else's item on the line with the same stipulation applying in the event of a loss. These matches have a storied history in Mexico. Upon unmasking, it is not unheard of for a wrestler's real name and information to be published as a form of further humiliation. The loser can be forced to physically hand the mask they just lost to the winner. In a way, like in a particular in a mask versus mask or mask versus hair match, if you lose your mask, it's almost the equivalent of doxing in a way. Because as I said, it's your identity. Many masked wrestlers over the years had never, when they are masked wrestler, they've never made their real name or their real information public. They've somehow been able to maintain. They've maintained that sense of kayfabe between the life as the masked wrestler and the life of the person behind the mask. They managed to keep those separate. But when a wrestler is forced to unmask because of the mask versus mask stipulation, they lose that separation. It's like they basically lose that identity. And some wrestlers, some luchadors have never recovered from that. Some have. We've seen like Rey Mysterio, an example, Rey Mysterio Jr. A lot of people may not know this, but Rey Mysterio, the Rey Mysterio that most people know of today is Rey Mysterio Jr. His uncle was Rey Mysterio Sr. Um, just to So moving on then here to the next paragraph. The most popular types of wager are the mask of a masked wrestler or the hair of a non-masked wrestler. Most commonly put against each other in mask versus mask. In Spanish, máscara contra máscara, mask versus hair, máscara contra caballero, or hair versus caballero contra caballero matches. Throughout Mexico, when masked wrestlers lose their mask, they are not allowed to compete under a mask with the same gimmick. In addition to mask and hair, championships or careers as a form of retirement match can be put up as a wager in any combination. And that part of it, in terms of like career versus title, we've seen that more in the States than elsewhere. We've seen a number of those type of matches. Like I remember back in the early '90s there when Brian Pillman did that. Brian Pillman lost a match in which his career has ended. We came back as the Yellow Dog, and everybody knew it was him. He's the same move set and everything, but champion, like title versus career or career versus career. Those are more common in the States than they were elsewhere. Oh wow, Brian responded here. Let's take a look at some of the comments. You lose the mystique of being masked. Yeah, that's true. I didn't know Rey Mysterio was a junior. Yeah, he started wrestling in 1988. He was actually trained by his uncle, who wrestled as Rey Mysterio Jr. Obviously, Rey Mysterio Jr. had more fame than his uncle. Was a mainstay down in Mexico with like UWA and Universal Wrestling Association and its following promotion AAA. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Wow. Máscara contra máscara, mask versus mask. Yep. And I try my best to get the pronunciations right. Sure, you know that though, Brian, right? Sure, I hope everybody knows that. A lot of backstory to the career. Yes, there is a lot of backstory. You know, the thing is, a lot of fans today, they see a lot of these matches and they just like a lot of these specialty matches are just they're not always special anymore because they happen too often. When a lot of these matches were first came into being, they meant something. I said this earlier as well. Obviously, in the luchas de apuestas matches, whether it be Masters mask or Masters hair or hair versus hair or title versus career, career versus career, whatever, these wager matches, they mean something. Think about that. Think about going into a match where if you lose, you could lose your identity, whether that be with the mask or the hair, or as more happens in the states here, even your career could be ended. Now, theoretically, as I said, in Mexico, because the mask is a major part of a wrestler, a luchador's identity, losing the mask could also cost you your career. You may just totally slide down the card faster than if you were to get caught on if you were to get caught on an oil slick, if you were to slip on an oil slick or something like that. See what Brian has to say here. That's some high stakes. Yes, it is. It is. You know, professional, a lot of people like to say that professional wrestling is fake. It's not fake. It's more choreographed. The guys can get hurt in there, and they can also, you know, do things that really, put a lot of emphasis on what they do. So let's see. Let's go on with this paragraph I was reading here. In matches in which hair is on the line, the heel wrestler generally loses the match as it is designed to humiliate him. Among notable wrestlers who have lost such matches could Gorgeous George. For those of you who do not know Gorgeous George he was a wrestler back in the 50s, wrestled primarily out here in LA with what was at the time known as World Wrestling Associates. He was one of the first stars of the TV era. You could argue that this is Gorgeous George Wagner we're talking about, of course. He was kind of he was theoretically you could say he was like the nature boy even before Buddy Rogers. Everybody knows Ric Flair as the nature boy, but Ric Flair took that title from Buddy Rogers, and you could argue that to a certain extent, Gorgeous George wasn't as much as a nature boy as much. He was just more of a very prissy man. I've seen clips of Gorgeous George Wagner before from back in the 50s. I think even the Fabulous Moolah had been his valet at one point. But this Gorgeous George Wagner was I mean, he'd wear like pink tights, pink boots. He'd have the blonde hair. And he'd have like the hairpins. This guy was probably considered, was considered probably one of the prettiest wrestlers you'll ever see. I mean, he went by the name Gorgeous George. That tells you something. Okay, he was, you know, and then there was a Gorgeous George Jr. who wrestled in the '70s too, who is believed to be the kayfabe son of Gorgeous George Wagner. Let's see. Brian said something here, so let me see what Brian has to say. It's probably more choreographed in the American market, more so these days and in the past, though, right? Yeah, like particularly here in America, because of the whole emphasis on the sports entertainment angle of it. See, nowadays here in America they call it sports entertainment. Okay, but you if you were to watch something from like New Japan or All Japan or one of the Japanese promotions, you know, Japanese pro wrestling, or as it's called over there, Puroresu, I believe, Puroresu. Um, there's more of a mixed martial arts um, flavor to it, just being involved. But yeah, as you said, Brian, it probably is more choreographed. Plus, particularly with more the emphasis on television matches, you have more like TV time limit stuff. They try to keep most matches to about 10 to 15 minutes. Main events maybe like 20 to 30 minutes. You know, now like independent promotions, they'll have longer matches, but for like the main promotions like WWE, like AEW, like Impact, like Ring of Honor, because of the TV part of it, matches are shorter. They're meant to be quicker. So basically, you have to have everything more compact. You have to go boom, boom, boom. You know, you don't get as much. Like if you were to go to like, even if you were to go back and watch older wrestling shows, if you were to go back and watch like some of the more localized wrestling shows, or go back and watch older episodes of like Georgia Championship Wrestling or Mid Atlantic Championship Wrestling, you could get more of a feel for more of the ring psychology involved. Now, for those of you who don't know, Mid Atlantic and Georgia Championship Wrestling were the precursors to WCW. Just give you that little tidbit of information. Excuse me one moment. Oh, Brian came back with another thing. Let's see. Um, yes, it makes sense that the entertainment aspect of it has taken over because of TV. The technical skill is devalued in favor of the spectacle. Yes, very true, Brian. Um, if you notice, as I was talking about earlier with the ladder match, right? So I'll probably hit upon with some of the other matches in a little while here. You know, a lot of these specialty matches have become like what the term that is used often in pro wrestling is high spot. High spots are those like big moves, those like usually finishers, signatures, and like just those real spectacular moves. Those are called high spots. Wrestling today has become more of a high spot palooza than anything else. As I said, if you were to go back and you watch some house show footage, or you watch some of the older localized TV footage, you get more of an idea of the ring psychology and watching the match. Yes, the matches are a lot slower than they are today. You might in a 1 hour, like today, they try to cram like 8 to 10 matches in a 2 hour time frame. but you might get 4 or 5 good, depending for a 2 hour show, you might get 5 to 6, 4 to 6 good matches, maybe 3 to 4 in a 1 hour show on some of the older like syndicated type wrestling shows. You get more of an idea of the guy might work over a guy, maybe execute a couple of their signatures, and then finish them off with their or couple of their signatures, and then finish them off with their finisher. Um, Rather than having the high spot palooza. So let's see, back to okay. So wrestlers who have lost such. Gorgeous George was somebody I talked about quite a bit there. Adrian Adonis. Of course, when this happened to Adrian Adonis, this was towards the end of his career. This is he lost his hair in a match against, I think it was either Roddy Piper or Brutus Beefcake, where one of them put him to sleep and then he was humiliated. This was at a time towards the end of his career when he was going by the name Adorable Adrian Adonis, and he was really playing up at the time back in the late '80s there the whole gay character aspect. And then after leaving the WWF, of course, he would he would also after leaving it, he would take that to the AWA, where he finished up his career before tragically dying in that auto accident. See, I think. Oh yeah, we saw that one already. Oh, we saw that one already. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if those are new ones or not. Um, yeah, thank you for commenting, Brian. I really do appreciate it. It's nice to get some feedback. Um, and John and J Man, if you guys, I know you guys are here as well. Don't be afraid to ask any questions or make any comments if you guys have any. I would love to see what you guys have to say about some of this stuff as well. Um, I'm sure you guys have some stuff you'd like to contribute as well. Um, so, anyways, I guess somebody left. I don't know who left, but um, Glad they came in. Hopefully, they'll be back. Just check something real quick here. See if I can find out who's all per. Well, right now it's just Brian and me. Brian's just you and me right now. I guess are participating. Yeah, I just saw that too. Been in support. Well, I'm hoping you're finding out a lot of interesting information too in that, Brian. Um, I'm glad for the support too. Um, so, anyways, back to yeah. So Adrian Adonis, Jeff Jarrett, as everybody knows, lost his hair. That's when he got the short haircut and started using that front Russian leg sweep as the stroke. That's when he really got the. That's after. Actually, that's one of those rare occasions that where losing the hair actually ended up doing something better for him as opposed to work. Most guys usually their career goes downhill, but if anything, in Jared's case, his career seemed to go uphill because after that he actually ended up becoming a main eventer. You know, during his last stint in WCW, as well as when he started. Well, of course, starting up TNA, he was one of the co-founders of TNA. So, um, Kurt Angle lost his hair in a hair versus hair match. One of the things I heard about Kurt Angle, one of the reasons why they decided to have him lose his hair was because he was actually already suffering from male pattern baldness. He was already starting to bald at an early age, so they just figured they'd just shave it all off. Molly Holly lost her hair. Um, let's see, CM Punk, I think, and CM Punk. Everybody probably remembers CM Punk. He had longer hair and then he lost his hair. We're all heels when on the losing end of the hair versus hair matches. Um, while most wrestlers, especially female wrestlers, end up growing their hair back out, in some cases, the wrestler may tend to keep a shaved head as part of their look. For instance, and this is what I think they're about to go into what I was just talking about here. Angle's kayfabe explanation was that he could not regrow it despite using Rogaine hair tonic and even fertilizer. Oh God! Oh, fertilizer! Oh, that is funny. Fertilizer. Dang, that's being desperate. That is being desperate. Fertilizer. I think everybody knows what fertilizer is. You're basically saying you put you know what on your head to try to grow your hair. And just in case you don't, it's a 4-letter word that rhymes with it. Oh boy. Uh, from the time, okay, like Brian, from the time I stepped in there was a lot of good info, and then laugh out loud. Oh, yeah, I must have jumped past early balding. Life is no fun. Yeah, yeah. So to remedy to remedy the problem, you just have the guy shave his head, and then go on a very comical stunt by um having the stuff that comes out the other end um to try to grow it back. Uh, hey, Kurt, um, fertilizer is better with grass than on the human head. Okay. In reality, he was already going bald naturally, which is what I had alluded to, with many jokes about his receding hairline having been made on TV long before his head was shaved. His wife, Karen, had wanted Angle to shave his head. Angle would briefly regrow it for his role in the movie Warrior before shaving it again. Some, such as Molly Holly and CM Punk, wore wigs or masks to hide their head until enough hair had grown back for them to forego wearing a wig or a mask. So, yeah, an ironic thing, Karen ended up divorcing Kurt. There was a huge story about that some of you may have heard, in which she had gotten involved in an affair with Jeff Jarrett during Kurt's time in TNA. They got divorced, and then Karen ended up marrying Jarrett. So the luchas, the luchas de apuestas match. That's basically what that is. It's a wager match, basically, where you wager something. So now the next match I'm going to talk about is another older traditional one. Another one that I don't think there's much information in regards to um, in regards to when exactly it came about, but the lumberjack match. Now, the idea of a lumberjack match is you'd have wrestlers surrounding the ring to keep the two main wrestlers in the ring. So, so here's how it reads: a lumberjack match is a standard match, with the exception that the ring is surrounded by a group of wrestlers not directly involved in it. These wrestlers, known collectively as lumberjacks, in case of female wrestlers serving as lumberjills, Jack and Jill, went up the hill, are there to prevent the wrestlers in the match from getting out of the ring. Again, another match that had a purpose. You'd have, particularly with heels, particularly in a championship match, right? If you have a heel champion. So in many promotions, with the exception of international titles, most titles have a stipulation. The only way unless otherwise stipulated, the only way you can win a title is either on with a pinfall or a submission. Title cannot change hands on a DQ or a countout loss. Now, there are times when some wrestlers would either intentionally get themselves disqualified or intentionally get counted out. So if you have a wrestler who keeps running out of the ring, the best thing to do is to surround the ring with a bunch of other wrestlers. If the wrestler tries to run away, throw him back in. That's the idea of the lumberjack match. Um, you know, the group of lumberjacks are typically split up into groups of faces and heels, or good guys and bad guys, who occupy opposing sides of the rings. Now, generally speaking, the way it generally works, if you go on the side of lumberjacks that are, like, if you're a face and you go to the side of the rings that are faces, or if you're a heel and you go on the side that are heels, they'll help you out. They won't like beat up on you or anything like that. Um, they'll just kind of like pat you on the shoulder. Yeah, keep going, man. They'll encourage you. They'll give you your time to get back in the ring and all that. You know, but if you find yourself on the opposing side, in other words, if you're a face and you find yourself on the heel side, or you're a heel and you find yourself on the face's side, then watch out, buddy, because you're going to get mauled. You're going to get mauled like crazy. Um, you know, you're going to find yourself. Let's see. Okay, I didn't know DQ or timeouts would invalidate a changeover. In championship matches, more traditionally, that there's always the only titles that I know of traditionally where that wasn't the case was an international title, like NWA international title, which was defended in All Japan a lot. Well, I think I knew it implicitly rather than explicitly. Okay, and then I haven't seen a lumberjack match since the early 2000s. Yeah, again, it's probably one of those matches that, uh, you know, probably doesn't get used as much. Again, you know, a match like that would take a considerable amount of time. And, Brian, as you know, if you watch wrestling these days, the rules are are enforced a lot more loosely now. So a guy can't necessarily run away because even the ref doesn't always fully count the full count of 10 or 20, whatever the count out rule is. Because what ends up happening is, okay, if one wrestler goes out, then the other wrestler goes out to go after him, to beat on him on the outside, to use, if you watch Raw, you'll see guys pound each other into the tables, pound each other on the guardrails, bash each other into ring posts, and then throw them back in. So, yes, I remember when matches be about 30 to 45 minutes. Yeah. Again, as I said, with more the advent of television, um, more the advent of television, with having to have more matches that are going quicker. You're not getting to play out the psychology as much. And matches like a lumberjack match, at least on a national level, they might still be being used more on the indie circuit, where you actually can have 30 to 45-minute matches, you know, because you're not trying, it's not like you don't have to worry about commercial time or having to worry about keeping people's attention, because most of those fans like watching, they're more well studied, they're more like they watch, they like watching how the ring psychology works itself out, you know. But that's the case with the lumberjack, matches. Um, but yeah, that's the extent of the lumberjack matches. So now I'm going to talk about another traditional type match, which which we're now getting into the S's here. The scaffold match. Now you don't see these matches much anymore. There were very few, and they were popular more back in the '80s, particularly in like particularly in like World Class Championship Wrestling. I think had some. I think one of the more well known scaffold matches is probably, I think, between the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express during one of the Great American Bashes. But in a scaffold match, whoever falls off the scaffold is declared the winner. A variation named Elevation X uses a scaffold that's shaped like the letter X, which I believe that one is used in TNA Impact. A scaffold match, though, is basically so you have wrestlers who are on a scaffold above the ring. The idea is they fight on that scaffold until one of them gets knocked off. The person who gets knocked, the person or team, because there were a number of tag teams. As I said, um, there are a few famous tag team scaffold matches, including the Midnight Express versus Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express versus Fantastics. I believe the Road Warriors were involved in one as well. There was one of the more well known ones. Um, Jim Cornette actually took a pretty bad bump off a scaffold. Bump in professional wrestling just means, a fall or yeah, but yeah, that's a scaffold match. It's more of an older match. You don't, again, another match you don't see a lot of these days. Um, partly because it's a very dangerous match. You're falling off a huge scaffold. You know, um, yeah. So continuing on, then, trying to think just some of the other. There's a few more I wanted to get to. Trying to remember the exact order I wanted to see. Um, Let's see. Just give me a sec, because I just need to look through some of these matches real quick. Obviously, I wasn't gonna do all of them. I was gonna do more some of the more traditional matches, traditional specialty matches. I just need to mind myself of what ones I was thinking about doing that I haven't done yet. I think I talked about the last man standing deathmatch loser, H Town, Luchas, the Lumberjack, Luchas, the Cuesta. Um, oh yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, that's. I knew there was one before the STRs. Okay, steel cage match. This is probably one of the oldest forms of matches in professional wrestling history. So let me go ahead and read this then. Steel cages are one of the oldest form of enclosures used in professional wrestling. The earliest known steel cage matches of any kind took place on January 9th, 1936. Now, take into account this was 13 years before the formation of the National Wrestling Alliance. So the NWA title, world title that was being used at the time was the National Wrestling Association world title. Okay. And so on this date, January 9th, 1936, in Caruthersville, Missouri, in a car that included two such, they called them back then, chicken wire fence matches between Lon Chaney and Otto Ludwig, and Joe Dillman versus Charles Sinke. These matches took place in a ring surrounded by chicken wire in order to keep the athletes inside and prevent any potential interference. They have evolved a great deal over time, changing from chicken wire to steel bars to chain link fencing. The latter is now the standard um, due to being cheaper to manufacture, lighter to transport, and flexible, and thus safer for the wrestlers. Yeah, because chain link fencing obviously has more give. If you're bashing a guy's head into a chain link fence, there's more give there. I mean, yeah, you still are going to get opened up, um, but the idea, of course, of steel cages to keep guys from running out of the ring, or keep the wrestlers who are wrestling the match inside the ring, and keep anybody who would interfere in the match from the outside of the ring. So a steel cage match is a match fought with a cage formed by placing sheets of mesh metal around in and against the edges of wrestling ring. The most common way of winning is by simply escaping the cage, either over the top of the cage wall and having both feet touch the arena floor, or by escaping through the cage door with both feet touching the arena floor. So basically, escaping the cage has generally been the main way to win. But there have also been times when pinfalls and submissions were also used as a way of winning in a cage match. As was probably saying here. The other occasional ways to win a steel cage match are by pinfall, by submission, though these are less common stipulations in the modern era. And even less likely stipulation is that weapons can be thrown into the ring by wrestlers' managers. It is possible to have one wrestler attempting to escape over the top, and we've seen that a number of times over the years. The cage wall, while another tries to escape through the cage door. In Mexico, steel cage matches are won by just climbing to the top of the cage wall. In Impact Wrestling, the matches were often called Six Sides of Steel, as the cage surrounded their six-sided ring. Now, among some of the famous cage matches over the years, there's a couple of major ones that are considered of historical. Okay, it looks like Brian added some comments here. Yeah, steel cage matches were highly entertaining. Yeah, and I'm about to explain why. Well, I think I did kind of catch a little bit of one of your other comments here, and I'll get to that in a sec. Let's see now. Yeah, it was slightly safer for chainmail. I still remember when Mick Foley was thrown off the top of by the Undertaker. Wait, was that hell? Yeah, that was Hell in a Cell. Hell in a Cell is another type of. Hell in a Cell is a variation on the cage match where Hell in a Cell is completely enclosed. Okay, you not only have the four sides surrounded, but you have enclosed in the top as well. So if you get out of the cage, get up on the cage, that's Hell in a Cell. Okay, and yes, again, another high spot palooza type match. You know, Mick Foley was known for taking those huge bumps. You know, and if you see him nowadays, you know he paid the price for that. Okay, that was Hell in a Cell. That's a variation on the cage match. But where Mick got that idea from was probably from one of the most famous cage matches that happened back in 1982 in Madison Square Garden. In a match for the WWF Intercontinental Championship, in a match between the champion at the time, Magnificent Don Muraco, and Jimmy Superfly Snuka. Jimmy Snuka climbed to the top of the cage and took what is now known as very famous, and this is where the his finisher got its name from, and where he got his nickname from, Superfly. He took he took a leap from something like 15 feet in the air. He took a giant leap off of the cage to try to splash Don Muraco. From what I understand, Muraco was able to move out of the way and ended up winning the match. Or maybe he did hit it, but didn't win them. But basically, back in '82, that was that was one of the that's actually what inspired Mick Foley. It was that Superfly leap, Superfly splash off that cage. Mick Foley was actually there at that event. That happened in 1982. I don't remember the exact date. Probably try to look it up real quick here. Um, right. Just looking something up here. If I okay. Trying to find. Yeah, June 28th, 1982, in which Snuka leapt from the top of a cage and on. Actually, So that was actually okay. I also knew he did one against Magnificent Morocco too, but they're saying here that the first time he did it was against Bob Backlund in a match for the WWF Championship at the time. So I stand correct. Oh, actually no, Snuka. Okay, Snuka also feuded. Yeah, yeah, he was involved in a few. But I think one of his first times he actually did the Superfly Leap was on Backlund. But I also remember him doing one. I believe reading about him doing one against Magnet. Oh, this is what I was thinking of. Okay, so here's I think I just found it. So his feud with Magnificent Don Morocco led to a defining moment in Snuka's career. On October 17th, 1983, in a steel cage match at Madison Square Garden, the match ended in a loss for Snuka, but afterwards he dragged. Okay, so this is actually after the match he did this. He dragged Morocco back into the ring and connected with the most famous Superfly splash of his career off the top of a 15-foot high steel cage. Future wrestling stars The Sandman, Mick Foley, Tommy Dreamer, and Bubba Ray Dudley were all in attendance at the event and cite the match as the reason they decided to actively pursue professional wrestling. That was the match I was talking to you guys about. October 17, 1983. After his loss to I knew I'd read about it. I just didn't remember all the details right. But after he lost the match, he dragged Morocco back in and hit the Superfly splash that led to the inspiration of several other wrestlers to get into professional wrestling. Jimmy Snuka, who passed away back about 3 years ago. So um, that just goes to show you. That goes to show you the impact these matches can have, even on prospective wrestlers. Back to the other thing I was here. Yeah. So that was one famous steel cage match that happened. Um, Foley definitely took a lot of punishment. Oh yeah, and he actually, took a lot of it also earlier on in his career too. I mean, he even went over to Japan and participated in some hardcore matches in Japan as well around, around in the late '80s, early '90s, under his Cactus Jack persona. Quite an influential moment in wrestling history. Yes, it was. I mean, imagine that for a moment. You're at a wrestling event and you look up at this 15-foot high steel cage, and this man who's approximately 6'2", 6'3", maybe 250 pounds, takes a flying leap up onto another man. Hence the name Superfly. Excuse me one moment. Now, as I mentioned, October 17, 1983. Looks like, let's see here. Foley's one of my heroes in real life. When my dad died, he sent me a DM sending his condolences. Oh, that's good to hear. As I've never met Mick Foley myself, but from what I've seen and heard, he's a pretty cool guy. He's a pretty nice guy. So that's pretty nice of him. Achievement. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you know, yeah. In real life, again, Mick Foley, from what I've seen and heard, is a very nice individual. He's a very good guy. Um, but it's kind of funny. October 7th, 1983, was not the only big cage match that happened. A month later, November 26th, I believe, 1983, the first Starrcade, a Flair for the Gold. This was significant because this was a match in which Ric Flair had beaten Harley Race for the world heavyweight title. Now he'd beaten him earlier in the year for it too, but what made this match significant was that this was considered a passing of the torch, as it were. Harley Race had been, you've often heard Ric Flair over the years say, "To be the man, you have to beat the man," right? Excuse me one moment again. Okay. Well, from I believe it was February 2nd, 1970. See, was it from February of 1977 when he beat Terry Funk for his second NWA World Title reign through 1983 to having dropped the title and regained it a few times. I think by this time he was a 7-time NWA World Champion. But from February of '77 up to that point at the first Starrcade in 1983, Harley Race was the man in the NWA. He was the man. And during this cage match at the first Starrcade, a Flair for the Gold, with Flair beating Race for what I believe was, I think, possibly his third title reign, his third NWA World Title reign. Harley Race had passed the torch from himself to Ric Flair, and Flair would become the man in the NWA and eventually WCW throughout the 80s there. He was the NWA WCW's counter to Hulk Hogan in the WWF. Let's see what J-Man has to say here. What my dad has told me, Terry Funk was almost as crazy as Mick Foley. Yeah, I've seen some of Funk's matches. Yeah, Funk, Terry Funk was at times just as crazy and just as volatile as Foley was. he had a legendary empty arena match against Jerry Lawler in the '80s. Now, mind you, he was probably more technically sound than than Mick Foley was. Much of the early part of his career, he's more of a technical wrestler. Um, After his father passed away in 1973, he and his brother, of course, took over running their family's wrestling promotion, the NWA territory based out of Amarillo, NWA Western States. Um, but Terry Funk would win the NWA World title from Jack Briscoe December 10th, 1975, and hold it until February of 1977. So over a year, like 14 months before dropping it to Harley Race. But as I was saying, that match at the first Starcade was the match in which Harley Race had actually passed the torch on to Ric Flair. Looks like we have another person came in. Um, John, are you back? Hmm. Let's see. Yeah. Well, I see who. Um. So who else has joined us now? Um. Love to hear from you. I was just talking about, of course, steel cage matches. Um. You know. So with that, let's. As I mentioned earlier, Brian, yes, the Hell in a Cell is a variation on the cage match, but it's completely enclosed up top. So let's see now. The next match, of course, I'm going to talk about is a strap match. Now, the strap match is, you know, there have been a few variations of the strap match, different items used. Um, I'll read off the description here. A strap match, known by many names and done with many slight variations, is any match in which you compare on the opposite ends of a restraint to keep them in close physical proximity, meaning you can't run away from somebody. By definition, a strap or anything tied to it are considered legal and in play weapons. The most common rule for victory in it is for one wrestler to have to go around the ring touching all four corners in order without stopping. Although they can also end in pinfalls. Now, basically, the idea is that you basically have to, usually most of the time, you have to incapacitate your opponent in such a way to where you drag them around the ring and you touch all four corners. If your momentum gets stopped, if they stop your momentum somehow, then you have to start all over again. So if they somehow pull you back and keep you from touching a corner, you have to start all over again. That And anyways, at WCW's Uncensored 1995, Hulk Hogan actually dragged non-participant Ric Flair to all four corners in order to win his strap match against Big Van Vader. Because the strap's legality and subsequent use as a choking device, submissions are generally not allowed. Um, yeah, and okay, and this is the part where they talk about whether it's the strap match or the bull rope match or or a chain match, or the dog collar match. All these matches are basically the same. You're basically tied together, and you have to win. You have to touch all four corners with whatever the implement is being in play. Meaning, you could use it as a weapon. You could use it as a choker. You could whip people with it. But here, I'll read this part, and then it'll become a little bit clearer. The strap match is one of the most varied forms of professional wrestling match type, both in name and implements used, with the name used generally coming from the implement used and one or both of the participants' gimmicks, i.e., a Russian chain match or a Yapapai Indian strap match, a Samoan strap match, a Texas bull rope match, country whipping match. Common restraints include a belt, a bull rope, length of rope with a cowbell on it, steel chains, 1 to 2 foot leash or leather strap. In the dog collar variation, the dog collar match, the wrestlers are connected by the neck by dog collars. Now, the dog collar match, even though it was popularized by the Pit Bulls in ECW, one of the more famous dog collar matches happened actually again at the first Starrcade I talked about. In this case, between Roddy Piper and Greg Valentine over Valentine's United States Heavyweight Championship. Or actually, I don't know. Actually, no. Neither one of them had the title at the time. It was in this case it was used to help settle the feud because Piper was leaving for the WWF at the time. This was also the match that was believed where Piper lost his ear. This match proved so violent that Roddy Piper actually lost his ear in this match. And let me see. It looks like I'm going to keep the stream up, but I have to tend to the baby mic. Okay, I understand, Brian. Hopefully you can hear some of this stuff. Hopefully you'll learn a lot of this stuff. I know you. Again, let me just, Brian, if you can hear me here, let me just say this live on the stream. Once again, I know I said it in messages to you, and so then congratulations on the birth of your second child back last Sunday, Zion. I hope he and Israel get along, and as brothers should, hopefully. But the best to you and Diamond. So hopefully, all goes well. So, anyways, back to what we were talking about here. So, of course, in these type of restraint matches, whether it be a strap match or bull rope match, depending upon the implements used, they can be used. Obviously, a leather strap or a belt can be used like as a whip. Bull rope, you could really cut somebody up with the cowbell, or if you rub a person's skin against the hide of the rope, you can give them rope burns, maybe even open them up. With a chain, you could obviously choke people with a chain or beat them down like a whip chain. Same thing with a dog collar. Dog collar match is probably even more brutal and dangerous because at least with the other matches, whether the strap match or the bull rope match or the chain match, usually you're restrained at the wrist. You're tied up at the wrist. You have more control. But with a dog collar match, that thing's tied around your neck. It's like you're being dragged around. Your head's being jerked all over the place by your opponent's body mass. You could take the chain and start whipping the guy with it, but in order for it to work, you probably have to be up close because you could be choking yourself with it as well, putting a lot of restraint against it. Um, excuse me one moment. Now, I know we probably don't hear a lot about the restraint type matches anymore as much. You don't see them as much. Again, as I alluded to the conversation I was having with Brian earlier, idea of the TV time limits and all that, because these matches, specialty matches as a whole, generally, if done right, take a considerable amount of time. You can't just have like a 10-minute strap match or a 10-minute cage match or what have you. It just wouldn't work, particularly with restraint matches like this, because, you know, part of the ring psychology in it is the expectation. It's like you get around, you tag one corner, you tag two corners, you tag three, and then you're about to tag a fourth, but then guy pulls you, yanks you back, and you have to start all over. Or as happened in a few occasions, um, I remember here. I think I did remember reading about a chain match that happened between. Actually, I didn't read about it. I actually saw um, another. I saw a video somebody did on the Great American Bash '91 that covered where Sting versus Nikita Koloff chain match, where in some cases in some of those restraint type matches, you have a case where um, you have so maybe instead of trying to pull the wrestler back, you have if let's say you're carrying around the guy on your back, maybe you guys are together at the chain. Maybe you got the guy choking him like this. So you go and you touch one corner, and then when you turn around, he touch your opponent touches a corner, um, and then you get to all three. You get to three corners, and then somehow your opponent will touch the last corner before you, and then all of a sudden he's won the match. I think what happened at the '91 Great American Bash was got to the point where both wrestlers had come, Sting and Nikita Koloff had come down to their last, um, come down to trying to tag the last corner. Sting had tried to fly over Nikita to tag that last corner, but in the process, in doing that stinger splash, pushed Nikita into the corner, giving him the win. You have certain elements like that that definitely make things interesting. So, anyways, so moving on then from the strap match. Um, the next match I'm going to cover is a street fight. So the street fight has been around for a while. Probably used more in heart. So a street fight is a match without disqualifications in which falls count anywhere and weapons are legal. It's basically a hardcore match. Sometimes street fights have the name of the host arena city, like a Chicago street fight, which of course was a specialty of the Road Warriors, or a New York street fight, which I believe Adrian Adonis earlier in his career specialized in. Two holiday themed variants also include specialty themed weapons for the day in question. Trick or street fight, Miracle on 34th Street fight. Basically a street fight is a Falls Count Anywhere, anything goes type of match. Um, There've been a number of street fights. Back in 1977, there was a very famous the Tupelo street fight between on one side. Um, I think on one side it was the tag team of Larry Latham and Wayne Ferris. Wayne Ferris, for those of you who might not know, is the Honky Tonk Man, and Jerry Lawler, and I think Jackie Fargo, I believe. That was a very wild and nasty street fight. There was another famous street fight that happened in Mid South Wrestling, I think back in '86. Sting was a part of that one, along with Eddie Gilbert. I think Terry Taylor was also involved in that. I can't remember the fourth guy, but yeah, street fights basically idea a Falls Count Anywhere, no DQ, those type of match. They're pretty common. Um, let's see now. Let's see. Okay. So with that, let's see now. So one more match that I wanted to checking one more time. As I said, I've been focusing primarily on the more traditional. I mean, yeah, I know, like, the tape fist. Um, I want to kind of cover the tape fist and the brass knuckles. Basically, they're both very similar matches. A tape fist match, you basically wrap your fist in tape, in very heavy tape, to where you can hit your opponent's heart. There's a case where normally you're not allowed to tape up your fist because it's like adding a weapon to you. Okay, having your fist taped, um, having your fist taped makes your punches harder, makes your hand more firmer. So it'll give you it normally would give you an unfair advantage. But if you sign up for a tape fist match, both opponents can wrap their hands up in tape and beat the what out of each other. And there's a brass knucks type match, brass knuck title based around this match, which is basically the same concept, but instead of a tape fist, it's more brass knucks. Brass knucks are legal. You can use them. You can knock the holy what out of people with brass knucks. So I think those are primarily a lot more um, the traditional type matches. I hope you guys have found them interesting. Find out a little bit more about wrestling history, as it were. Um, so now that I've done with the presentation, that wow, we've gone just over 2 hours here, so I'm going to start to wrap this up a little bit here. For those who are remaining in the on the stream here, do you guys have any questions or any comments you'd like to make? Anything you guys would like to ask about, or any clarification you want made on anything? Um, you know, um, I don't know who exactly is still in here, but is there any like questions or clarifications you guys might want on what I've mentioned, what I've talked about, or I'm just kind of waiting to see if anybody has anything they'd like to say or add to the conversation. So I'm seeing that there still are 3 people here. I myself, and I'm guessing a couple others, maybe J-Man and you guys have anything you want to add? Huh. Well, if there's nothing else, I thank everybody who came in and participated in the stream. Brian, J-Man, we've been at this for over 2 hours now. I thank you guys for coming in. I hope you guys come back. Um, for those for again, and I appreciate the people who liked and shared the stream. Um, if you're not subscribed, I would hope that I've earned your subscription. Hope you would consider subscribing to my channel. For those who are already subscribed, thank you for coming in and participating. As we've gone a little over 2 hours now, I hope you guys found the information interesting and entertaining. And I am going to end the stream here. So I will wish you guys a good night and a good week. And I hope to see you again soon. Bye.